In the early hours of this morning, while you were sound asleep, the New South Wales Parliament was sitting, and at about 3 o'clock this morning passed the legislation that Chris Minns had promised. Legislation responding to the horror at Bondi. There's new gun control measures that he's introduced and new measures to control protesting and when and where it can be done. Let's take a look for a start at what the gun control measures actually cover. They cover a series of points. Firstly, they say that for any individual, they're only allowed to own 4 weapons. No more than 4 weapons for an individual. For a primary producer, that is for a farmer, they can own up to 10 weapons. Professional shooters can also own up to 10 weapons. And the owners of gun licences and guns must be Australian citizens. Now, there already been some sort of a comeback on this. There are people concerned that this is too much. This is an overstep of government. We've got enough controls on guns already. The question is, have we? Now, Louise, let me start with you, because there is a state member of Parliament you've done some communications work for, Helen Dalton. She comes from Murray, and she's concerned that it's an overstep, isn't she?
She is, and look, there's other regional MPs who feel the same way as Helen does. So I think Roy is a classic example of that. He's got the seat of Barwon, and he's got the biggest electorate in New South Wales. Helen's got the second biggest electorate. They have many thousands of responsible and licensed gun users and firearms experts in a way, and their view is that this is an overreach because it will impact how they actually do their farming and how they run their agricultural businesses. They need weapons, or need guns rather, for livestock and for feral pests and things like that. And they're all responsible, and they feel they're being treated as criminals because of this sort of knee-jerk legislation which is being pushed through by the government.
Very quickly.
Can I ask genuinely though, and again, completely without judgment, but why would they need more than 10? I mean, obviously they can only use one at a time. 10 to me seems like more than enough for even a farmer to be able to euthanise.
I think their point on that is some of these farmers and agricultural experts have more than one property, and you can't really transport weapons from property to property. So that's an issue as well. But also I think overarchingly that they feel they haven't been consulted. They feel this has been pushed through as a reaction to what happened in Bondi. And look, nobody wants people who are irresponsible holding weapons. Nobody wants that, particularly people in the regions don't want that at all. But they do feel they've been sort of sidelined, and this has been rushed through without proper consultation.
I think that's probably fair. They haven't been consulted properly, have they? But I've got to... Don't be shocked, Joe, but I agree with you on this.
Yeah, I can't get my head around it. Maybe I'm just hopelessly naive.
My late father-in-law was a farmer. He had one rifle. He had one. Now, it was only one farmhouse on the property, but if he had several properties, one at each would have been enough. Now, I'm a city dweller. I'm not close to what they're doing. I don't know what they're going through. But I still can't understand. Joe's question is the right one. Why is 10 really onerous? It doesn't look onerous to us.
But there's different firearms for different needs. So there's feral pests, there's, livestock management. There's lots of different reasons you may need different types of guns. And you may have different ages of people working on your farm. So, for example, a teenager or a young man will hold a different, firearm from, say, an older person who's maybe more experienced as well. I think it's just more about...
They'd have their own allocation of 10.
Well, if you're looking at residences as well and farms, I just feel they feel they've been sidelined in this whole discussion. They would welcome a review if they could be part of the process, but it's been sort of rushed through. And actually, the legislation won't even have an effect for a number of months. It has to go through that whole due process in a way. So to do it before Christmas, and again, they're all, of course, absolutely horrified by what happened in Bondi.
I think they've got a tough task persuading people.
It's a difficult situation
that
for them.
10 guns is not enough, and for a private individual, 4 guns is not enough. When you look at the protest laws, there are a number of restrictions. One is when a terrorist situation has been declared, the police can deny the right to protest in that area, the area where a terrorist situation has been declared. They can also, for 14 days, they can extend that to 3 months. They can also require people in certain circumstances to remove face masks or face covering if they've got those. Is this a good idea, Joe?
Yeah, I think it is. I'm always concerned by anything that infringes on free speech, but frankly, it is clear that, in particular, the pro-Palestinian protest organisers have not shown any capacity to act responsibly.
Yep.
They were irresponsible in seeking to hijack the Harbour Bridge, even though the court eventually ruled in their favour wrongly, and in the end they had to turn back or risk a massive public safety issue, as the police had warned would happen. They tried to hold protests immediately in the wake of the Bondi terror attack, while the city was still reeling, while the Jewish community was still grieving. They decided that this was a good time to advance the very cause that the terrorists were killing in the name of, allegedly. I mean, this is the most disgraceful, disrespectful, disgusting behaviour. These are protests that had chants like globalise the Intifada, like death to the IDF.
Which are incitements to violence, aren't they?
That's right. And and that's another thing that the government has made absolutely clear now. So Chris Menz has been very clear-headed on this. He's already had to demote one of his idiotic MPs, Anthony D'Adam, who got up in Parliament and spoke against this. So I think, you know, if you can't behave responsibly, then your rights will be taken away. I think that is inevitable. I'm glad that it only applies to terror situations and there's no blanket bans or anything like that. But, you know...
It's not about stifling public debate, is it? It's about making the city and those sort of venues safer, particularly for Jewish Australians who have been most impacted by these sort of
protesters have got to be able to be heard, but it is simply untrue to say there are never any limits on free speech. There always are limits on free speech. They're not completely unlimited. And, I mean, I think most people are going to look at this and say it's not onerous. This is just, there's such limited restrictions. They cover so little, there's no way they can be onerous except for someone who wants to do the wrong thing.
That's right.